El Reliance regulatorio no es solo un concepto, es una herramienta estratégica que impulsa el acceso, la eficiencia y la confianza en los sistemas de salud a nivel mundial. Descubre cómo ayudar a acelerar el acceso a tratamientos innovadores en nuestro seminario web regional. Enfoques innovadores para el Reliance regulatorio, tendencias globales y perspectivas para América Latina. Con un distinguido panel de expertos y autoridades. Juntos exploraremos tendencias globales, estudios de casos nacionales y herramientas prácticas para acelerar el acceso a medicamentos de calidad en América Latina y el Caribe. Acompáñanos en esta importante conversación.
Me complace mucho darles la más cordial bienvenida a este
It's a
encuentro.
pleasure to
El
welcome you all
fortalecimiento de los
to this
sistemas de
meeting. The
control
strengthening
es
of
un pilar
regulatory
esencial
systems
para
is an
crear
essential
sistemas de
pillar
salud
to
más
guarantee
sólidos,
solid,
confiables y sostenibles.
reliable, and
En este
sustainable health systems.
contexto, el
In this
Reliance regulatorio
context,
es una herramienta clave
this is a
para optimizar
key
recursos, acelerar el
source to
acceso a
use
medicamentos de
resources
calidad
and to
y
do
fomentar la
to
cooperación
use
entre autoridades
these
sanitarias.
and foster
Conscientes de esta
all of these.
importancia y con un alto compromiso social, la Federación Europea de Industrias y
The
Asociaciones Farmacéuticas,
Federation,
EFPIA, la Federación
FPIA,
Latinoamericana de la Industria Farmacéutica,
the
FIFARMA,
Latin
la
American
Federación
Federation
Internacional de la
of the
Industria
Pharmaceutical
Farmacéutica,
Industry, FIFARMA,
IFPMA,
and
hemos unido
FPMA
esfuerzos para organizar este
have joint
seminario web
efforts
llamado
to
Enfoques
conduct
Innovadores
this
para el Reliance
webinar
Regulatorio,
called Regulatory
Tendencias
Focus
Globales y
in
Perspectivas para
Reliance
América
and
Latina y el Caribe.
Perspectives and
Mi
Global
nombre es
Trends
Diego
for Latin
Salas,
America and the
director de
Caribbean. My
Asuntos
name is Diego
Regulatorios de
Salas,
FIFARMA, y
Director
tendré el
of
gusto de
Regulatory Affairs
acompañarlos
from
hoy como
FIFARMA,
moderador
and
a lo largo de
I
la
will
jornada.
be happy
Gracias
to
por
join you today
acompañarnos
as the
por
moderator.
sumarse a este diálogo
Thank you for
regional e
joining and
internacional
for
tan
uh,
relevante
adding your
para el
efforts to this
presente y
relevant
para el
activity
futuro
to
de la
start
regulación sanitaria.
working on the
Antes de
future of
comenzar,
sanitary
quiero dejar con
regulation
ustedes
in our
algunas
continent.
breves
We'd like
instrucciones
to
sobre el
share
uso de
some
la
brief
interpretación
instructions on the use
simultánea
of simultaneous
disponible en
interpretation,
este webinar.
and
Algunas
it's
presentaciones se
available during
desarrollarán en
this
idioma
webinar.
español
Some
y
presentations will
otras
take
en
place in
idioma
Spanish
inglés,
and others
pero
in
sí
English.
contará con interpretación
But we
simultánea
will
en
have
español,
simultaneous
inglés y
interpretation
portugués
into
durante
Spanish,
esta
English, and
sesión.
Portuguese
Al
during the
seleccionar
entire
el idioma de
session.
su preferencia,
To
usted
choose the
debe
language of
ir al menú
preference,
inferior de su
you have to
pantalla
go to
y
the
hacer clic en el
menu
icono
bar in the
globo
bottom of your screen
superior.
and click
Al
on
hacerlo, se
the
desplegarán las
icon
opciones
with the
buscando
globe
inglés,
shape.
español, inglés y
And then you'll
portugués.
find the languages
En caso de
available.
que no
Choose the
nos
language of your
escuche la
preference.
presentación en su
In
idioma
case you don't
original
hear the
y para
presentation
mejorar su
in the
interpretación
original
de la
language and
misma,
to improve the
le
quality of the
recomendamos
sound,
seleccionar
we
si su
recommend you
preferencia
to
era audio
choose the
o si
option of muting
priorizaba
original audio
oportunidad en la
to
traducción.
guarantee better quality
Este
in
evento
the
reúne expertos
interpretation. This
internacionales,
event
representantes de la industria farmacéutica y
joins
autoridades
all
reguladoras
of the
con el objetivo
authorities
de explorar
and main
nuevas
characters of this
perspectivas y
industry in
enfoques
order to explore
innovadores
new
sobre el
focus
Reliance
on
Regulatory,
innovation and
destacando
reliance
experiencias
for
prácticas y
the
herramientas
pharmaceutical
que apoyen
industry,
a las autoridades
highlighting
regulatorias de América
the
Latina y
tools
el
that will
Caribe
help the regulatory
en
authorities in
fortalecer
Latin
sus
America and the
sistemas
Caribbean in
y la
strengthening
aceleración
their
del acceso a
regulatory
medicamentos de
systems
calidad.
and
De
having
manera más
timely access
específica, este
to
espacio
quality
busca
medications.
presentar ejemplos de
Specifically,
caso
we
detallado,
seek to
ejemplos
look at
concretos que ilustren
specific
cómo las
cases and
autoridades
examples to
reguladoras
illustrate
aprovechan
how
efectivamente el
the
Reliance
authorities
regulatorio
are
como una
using
herramienta estratégica.
reliance
También
as a
busca
strategic
facilitar el
tool.
diálogo
And we
regional
also
sobre la
seek to
adopción de
facilitate
mecanismos de
regional dialogue
reliance
on the adoption
ajustados a
of the
las
mechanisms
prioridades
in reliance
específicas de salud
adjusted
pública en los
to the
países de
main
América Latina y el
priorities
Caribe.
of public health
La
in the
agenda de hoy
countries
se
in Latin
espera que
America
sea
and the
sumamente
Caribbean.
enriquecedora y
Today's agenda is
especialmente
very
diseñada
rich
para
and
ofrecer una
designed
visión
specifically
global,
to offer
práctica
a
y
global vision
estratégica sobre el
that
Reliance.
is practical and
Iniciaremos con
strategic.
una ponencia
And we will
magistral a cargo del
start
doctor José
with
Vicente Coto, un
a
reconocido
keynote
asesor en
presentation
fortalecimiento de los
by
sistemas
Dr. Jose Vicente
regulatorios.
Porto, well
Posteriormente,
known in
exploraremos
regulatory
experiencias
affairs. And
concretas
then we
a
will have
través de
specific
intervenciones de la
experiences
Agencia Europea
through
de Medicamentos, la
the European
experiencia
Agency for
de la Agencia
Medications,
Europea de
the
Insumos
experience of
y una
the regulatory
presentación
authorities,
técnica sobre una
and a
herramienta
technical
para
presentation
garantizar que el
on a
producto
tool
es
to
especialmente
guarantee that the
muy conocido
product
en las autoridades. Más
is
adelante
well
desarrollaremos un panel de
recognized by the
discusión
different
dinámico
authorities.
y
Then we'll have a
multidisciplinario
dynamic
que
discussion
unirá
panel
IFPMA,
that
la Agencia
will join
Reguladora de Egipto y
the
la Autoridad Reguladora de
Egypt
Anvisa,
Regulatory
Anvisa
Agency and the
para
Brazilian
debatir
Regulatory
sobre
Agency,
el
Anvisa,
compliance y el
to
equilibrio con
debate
nuevas
on
normas.
reliance and
Hoy
the
cerraremos
balance
esta
and
jornada
trust
con
it
una
will
reflexión inspiradora
generate.
sobre
And we will
Reliance
close
como
with inspiring
estrategia
comments about reliance
regulatoria a cargo de
and
IFPMA.
by
Sin
the
más por el momento y
EFPMA,
para dar inicio a nuestro evento, tenemos
PISR.
el
So
honor
without further
de
ado,
iniciar
we'll have the honor
con el
to
enfoque
start with
de
the
la
first
visión,
presentation
acción
on the
y el
vision
poder
and action
estratégico del
and
Reliance en el
strategic power
fortalecimiento de
of
los
reliance in
sistemas
the strengthening
regulatorios
of
a
regulatory
cargo del
systems
doctor José
by
Vicente Coto.
Dr.
El
Jose
doctor Coto es
Vicente.
médico y cirujano
Dr.
egresado de la
Cotto
Universidad de
is
San
a
Carlos de
physician
Guatemala
and surgeon from Guatemala University and also specialized in general surgery. He has a master's degree in public health. A graduate has a diploma in risk management, quality systems, and administration and teaching at the university. His professional experience includes having been the National Director of Medication of the Office of Medications and the Regulatory Authority, Salvador back then, and since October 2019 until December 2024, he was the advisor for medications and other technologies in the Pan American Health Organization. Dr. Cotto, it is a privilege for you to be here and join us in this presentation and for you to have the keynote. So we know that your attendees will enjoy your presentation. So the audience is yours. You can share your screen.
Muchas gracias, Diego.
Diego.
Quisiera comenzar agradeciendo
I'd
a
like
los
to thank
organizadores, a
you
las tres
all, the
organizaciones
organizers, the three
patrocinando este evento,
organizations
por la
that are
invitación.
sponsoring this event for the
Para mí es
invitation.
un honor
And also, it's an
abrir la
honor for me
discusión con
to
tan
open up this
excelentes
discussion
panelistas que van
with such
a
an
seguir a
excellent
continuación.
group of panelists
El tema que
that
nos
will
ocupa
follow.
es,
The topic
en
today
inglés, Reliance.
at hand, it's called
Básicamente, ¿qué
Reliance,
es la
and
confianza regulatoria
it is
en cuanto a
regulatory
las decisiones
reliance on
que
the
toma una
decisions
agencia
made by
tomando en
an
consideración
agency
otra?
considering another.
Y en este sentido,
And in that
el título
sense,
de mi
the
ponencia,
title of my speech
de la visión a la acción.
it's from vision to action.
Comienzo con el concepto que
Start off
la
with the
Organización
concept that
Panamericana de la
the Pan
Salud,
American Health
hace
Organization,
algunos años,
PAHO,
la primera
has
conferencia de la Red
given in the
Panamericana,
Conference on the
la
Pan
PARF,
American Network, PARF,
definió Reliance
which
regulatorio,
defined
o algunos
regulatory
países lo han
reliance,
establecido,
and some
confianza
countries have established
regulatoria,
this
como un
as
acto mediante el cual
confianza
las
regulatoria,
agencias de una
as an action
jurisdicción toman en
whereby the
cuenta,
agencies
le
in a
dan peso,
jurisdiction
es
can
decir, le
consider
reforma
and
completa o
give
parcial
relevance,
a
partially or
evaluaciones
fully,
realizadas por
to the
otra
assessments made
agencia
by
o
other
institución confiable
agencies
para
or
tomar su
reliable
propia
institutions
decisión.
to make their own
¿Por
decisions.
qué es importante el
Why
reliance
is it
regulatorio?
important to have
Primero,
regulatory
hay
reliance?
que
Well,
reconocer
first of all, you have to
que
acknowledge
las
that
agencias
the
de regulación
agencies and
cuentan con
regulation
recursos limitados
have limited
ahora hay un poco
resources.
más de disponibilidad de
There's
fondos,
a little
pero
more availability
históricamente ha
now
habido un
of
problema de
financial resources,
recursos
but
y
historically there's
actualmente
been an issue
todavía
with that,
existe esa
and apparently
limitación
it
y las
still exists.
funciones
And the
regulatorias son
functions, the
funciones
regulatory functions
que
are
contrastan
functions
con la
that
limitación de
contrast
recursos
with the
y que cada
limitation of
vez se van
resources,
ampliando y
and that will
requiriendo de
be
mayor
enhanced or
recursos.
enlarged
En
and
segundo lugar,
require more
las
resources.
decisiones que
Second,
una
the
agencia toma
decisions that an agency
normalmente
makes
deben ser tomadas por
have
varias.
to be taken by
Voy a
several.
poner el ejemplo de un
So, for
registro que vamos a
example,
utilizar
a record that we're going to use,
repetidamente en mi ponencia.
a registry that we're going to
Un
use in
registro
my
sanitario
presentation
no
is
solamente se
a
hace en
health
un país.
registry that is done
El titular
not
del
only in one
registro
country, but the holder of
registra
that
en un país,
registration
en otro,
is
en una
in one
región,
country or
incluso
another, or
en
in a
varias
region,
partes del
or
globo.
even
De
in
tal manera
several
que
parts of the world.
este
So
proceso
this
de revisión y
process of
eventualmente de registro
review and
sanitario
eventually
es
health
reiterado.
registration
Tendría
is
muchísimo sentido
reiterated. So
que
it would
si
make a
este es
lot of sense that if this is
un proceso que se
a
va
process
repitiendo de
that
país en
repeats
país,
itself
pues obviamente
from country to
deberíamos
country,
nosotros
then
optimizar los recursos que se utilizan.
it should
La otra
optimize the
cosa
resources.
interesante de
Now, another
reconocerlo, y
interesting
esto
thing about
se ha hecho ya
recognizing
a través
this
de una
is what is
evaluación
done through an
de la madurez
assessment
regulatoria de
of
varios
the
países, que
regulatory
existe una
maturity
asimetría global.
of a country is
Quiere
that
decir que hay
there
países que
is an
cuentan con
asymmetry globally.
mayores
So some countries
recursos
have more
y
resources.
dentro del tema de
Uh,
madurez están
in
alcanzando
their
un
maturity, they are
fortalecimiento mayor que
reaching
otros.
a
Y
stronger
esto
stage
hace
than
que
others.
las
So
decisiones de
this
aquellos
makes the
países que no
decisions
cuentan con
that
los
one
recursos
country makes
necesarios
that does
pues
not
sean
have the
más
resources
difíciles. Y por eso es importante
necessary
que se pueda
is
contar
makes it
con
important to have
el apoyo de otras
the support
agencias que
of
son más
other
maduras.
agencies that are
La otra
more
cosa
mature.
interesante de la época es que
Now,
la
another
tecnología
interesting
avanza
part
cada vez
is that
más a
technology
pasos
advances further and
agigantados.
further,
En esta época
taking
nosotros
giant
vivimos una
leaps.
revolución de
We
hace
are
algunos
living
años
in a
sin precedentes
revolution
en la historia.
that is
De tal manera que es
unprecedented
muy
in
difícil
history.
para
So
la
it's
industria,
very difficult
para el
for the
desarrollo
industry,
tecnológico
for
y
the
por supuesto
technological
para el regulador
developments and the
mantenerse al día.
regulators
De tal manera
to
que
be up to
los
date.
recursos que
So
tenemos,
the resources that we thought were limited have to be dedicated very strongly to the growth and knowledge and skills of technological advancements. And the other part that is noteworthy is that when you look at who's doing reliance in the agencies, we have to acknowledge that it's been the most experienced agencies that are gambling more on this. So historically speaking, European agencies, Canada, and the Japanese agency are the ones that are more prone to betting on reliance. And now, through reliance, we can reach efficiency in regulatory management. So, in regard to the application, it's a conceptual error to think that reliance only has to do with one of those items. There's an emphasis on sanitary registration as the perhaps the only goal in Reliance, but the product cycle from its development and onset, clinical studies and authorizations from the market, or the post-registry, and of course, pharmacosurveillance of the batches, etc., and the integration of the changes in the medication are all applications that could be understood in Reliance. And here we see how in these basic regulatory functions, we can establish Reliance. So from the market authorization and especially the biological products like vaccines, etc., surveillance, pharmacosurveillance, and the entire cycle can be established with these reliance principles, and this would make the regulatory process more efficient. However, we also have to acknowledge that the agencies are more clear on the fact that the activity that has to be done in these regulatory agencies is based on the processes. So here I'm going to illustrate for example, this generic medication, how we can implement this registration in each of the functions. But on this opportunity, I'm just going to talk about the medication or the registration of this medication. Now, for the process, it's the other way around than regulatory registration that is more traditional. And every time you have an agreement, these requirements are similar, but from different countries, then the title holders have to or don't have to produce a new file for each country. And on the other hand, this will produce a result with a registration certification or observations and requirements in this process. And this has to be controlled through the review of the requirements and the observation certificate. Now, where can you do reliance in this process? Well, first of all, in the legal requirements and the files. It's important that it is an electronic file, and in the process and the training, and of course, in the certificate. So, in this whole process, we have several areas where we could have reliance, but this is one process from one function of which the regulatory agencies are required to perform a similar analysis, and we'd be more clear on reliance and trust being applicable in a series of processes in all the regulatory functions. But when we talk about reliance, we have to understand that reliance is a consequence of a process. So how do you improve efficiency in an agency through reliance? First of all, it's necessary to work on the knowledge of the regulatory agencies to know the processes in the different agencies. So we have to acknowledge that it's a difficult process when you begin considering the regulatory decisions of others before acknowledging this. And with the name in Spanish says this requires trust. So to trust, you need to, of course, have the knowledge of the other person. So that's why the first step is
Es decir, cómo
regulatory
hacemos el
cooperation. So
trabajo
how
de
do we
cada
do
agencia.
the
Cuando ya
work at
nosotros
each
tenemos
agency?
claridad en
When we're
cómo
clear
hace la otra agencia
on
el
what the other
proceso,
agency
entonces
does
sí, ya
with the
podemos nosotros
process, then
establecer
we are able to establish
una
a
búsqueda de convergencia en
search or a
cuanto a alinear
convergence
el
in
proceso
terms of
para que el
aligning the
resultado pueda
process
hacerse mejor.
so the result can
Evidentemente, la
be
ciencia regulatoria
valid.
cada
Of
vez nos
course,
va
regulatory
enseñando
science
que los
uh,
procesos que se involucran en
teaches
el
us
proceso
about the
regulatorio
processes that are
tienen que
involved,
ser elaborados de
and it
manera
has to
técnica y
be
científica. Después
done
de hacer
technically.
este
And of course,
acercamiento
after
a que cada
this
vez seamos más
approach
similares,
that we are more
obviamente
similar,
viene el
of
proceso
course,
donde ya se uniforman los
comes the
criterios.
process where
Varios países
the
ya han trabajado
guidelines are
muchísimo en
informed.
esto
There's many
y
countries
hasta
that have walked a long
entonces
path,
nosotros podemos
but
hablar ya de
we
un
could talk
adecuado
about
reliance
an
regulatory.
adequate
Es decir,
regulatory
cuando ya
reliance, and
nosotros
then when
estamos trabajando
we are
con
all
una clara
working
idea de cómo se hacen
on
los
a clear
procesos
idea of
en
how
la
to do
otra
the
agencia,
processes
cuando
in
ya
the other
estamos
agency,
acercando los
and we're
requisitos
coming closer to the
cuando ya
requirements, then,
evidentemente
and
estamos
when
tomando
clearly
la decisión
uh,
de que
the
yo voy
decisions
a
are being made,
considerar
that we're going to
la
consider
decisión de la otra
the
agencia,
decisions of
de
the other
manera que
agency,
esto me va a
then
saltar
this will
muchísimos de los
be
requisitos que hago.
uh,
Esto se ha
this was
trabajado
is
muchísimo
going
en el
to
mundo, tanto
correspond
lo
to the
que es
requirements made, and
el
this a lot
través de
of
los
work has
principios de
been done
reliance regulatorio,
through the
el anexo
principles of
10 de las
regulatory
buenas
reliance,
prácticas
Annex
regulatorias
10,
de la
best
Organización
regulatory
Mundial de la Salud
practices
y por
of
supuesto
the
IFPMA
WHO,
tienen
and of
ya
course the IPRP,
algunos
which have
documentos
some
ejecutando ya
documents
básicamente los principios
basically
con que se debe
which have the
trabajar en
principles
el
to
reliance.
work
Yo nada
on
más
in
menciono
reliance.
uno, la
And I'm just going to
soberanía.
mention
En
one,
ningún momento hacer
sovereignty. And
reliance, como se
there
está
is
planteando
no
hacer,
point
va a
where
lesionar los principios de
reliance is
soberanía.
going
Cada
to
país
hurt the
sigue
principles.
manteniendo las
Uh,
decisiones
every
y la
country keeps its
responsabilidad sobre
decisions
los
and
poderes regulatorios
responsibilities
nacionales.
on
Y obviamente el
national
impacto que ha
regulatory functions.
tenido,
And the impact that
primero
it's
desde
had,
el
of
punto de
course,
vista
from
de
the
el acceso a los productos,
access
los
to
países
products
importadores han
in the
establecido
importing
mecanismos
countries have
para
established a
reconocer y
mechanism
aplicar
to
directamente
acknowledge and
las
apply
autorizaciones de
directly the
comercialización del
authorizations of
principio de agencias
trade and
nacionales de
sales. The
referencia. Y
principle
esto
of
obviamente
these
agiliza
agencies is going
significativamente
to
la
speed up
importación de medicamentos.
the importing
Este
of these
ejercicio que
medications.
se ha
This
hecho
exercise
en
that has been
diferentes
done
regiones, incluso
in
en
different
Latinoamérica,
regions, even in Latin
obviamente
America,
choca con un
of
problema y es
course,
que no se ha hecho con un
has an
método
issue,
definido
which is
el
there is no
proceso
specific method for the
del
process
reliance en
in
autorización de comercialización.
reliance in
Esto ha resultado
trade,
en
and
un acceso que no es
there
regular y
is
obviamente
an
incluso
irregular
algunos
access
principios
and even
normativos que aplican
some
a algunos
regulatory
países que
principles that
no
apply to
tienen el
certain
rigor de
countries
acceso
that don't have the
y
rigor
garantía de
to
seguridad
access
y
and
calidad de los
guarantee
productos.
the
Muchos
security and
países
quality of
de
the
América
products.
Latina y el Caribe tienden
Many
a
countries
eximir de requisitos de
in Latin
autorización,
America
de comercialización para
perhaps
cualquier vacuna, producto
tend
farmacéutico,
to
siempre que se
waive
adquiera a
these
través de algunos
requirements
mecanismos
as
que
long as they
son
require certain mechanisms
regionales.
that are regional.
Ahora, ¿cómo se implementa
Now,
esto? Nada más algún par de
how is
palabras al
this
respecto.
implemented? Just a couple of words
Primero,
about
el
that.
reliance
First of
debe de
all,
ser
reliance has to be
planificado.
planned.
Esto, desgraciadamente, en la historia del
Unfortunately,
Reliance,
in the history
muchas
of
veces
Reliance,
ha sido
many times it
improvisado,
has been
de tal manera que no
improvised.
tiene un método de
So
implementación.
there
Es
is
muy
no method for
importante que
implementation. It's very
nosotros en
important
este momento
that we at this time, what we at this
apliquemos un
time
proceso de
apply
planificación en
a
donde
planning
primero se va a
process
tomar en cuenta
where,
la
first of all,
evaluación de la
we're going
capacidad
to
que
take
yo,
into account
de la
the
función que yo
capacity
voy a buscar en Reliance.
that
Yo tengo
we
que
are looking for
saber
in Reliance. So
cómo
we have
estoy
to know
haciendo mi trabajo
how
para que
we're doing
entonces se puedan
the work
identificar
so
aquellos
that we
socios
can identify the
con los cuales
partners
yo pueda
that
establecer
or
esa
where we can
relación de
establish that
confianza. Esto no es un
relationship of
cheque en blanco.
trust. This
No
is
podemos
not
hacer una lista
a blank
universal. Voy a
check.
hacer reliance
This is,
regulatorio
you
con
know, you
estos
can't have
40
universal regulations. You have
agencias,
to have
sino que
regulatory
tenemos que ser
reliance,
muy específicos y
but we have
muy
to be very
cuidadosos de que
specific
la
and very
función que
careful
yo voy
that
a utilizar para hacer
the
reliance
function
con
I'm going to
este
use for
país B
reliance
son
is
funciones en las cuales
a
ambos
function
tenemos el
where
mismo marco
we have the
normativo y
same
que yo
regulatory
realmente cuando
framework,
confíe en la
and
decisión del otro país,
where,
yo obviamente no
of course,
solamente mantenga mi estándar regulatorio,
if you don't
sino incluso de
obtain this
preferencia
regulatory
lo
standard,
incremento.
instead
Después
it would be
entonces habrá que
increased by
trabajar en la
preference.
política
So
y
we'd have to work
procedimientos
on
claros.
the
¿Cómo se va a
policies
hacer
and
el
clear
reliance?
procedures, how
Acuérdense ustedes que
reliance
el
will
regulador
take place.
tiene que
Remember,
tener una
the regulator has to have a characteristic that their decisions have to be certain. They have to be true. There has to be certain regulatory certainty. So the staff is trained, but so we have to have monitoring, and this monitoring will go through the establishment of indicators in a periodic review and a feedback survey. And I've highlighted this because we have this problem, which is endemic to our agencies, which is the data analysis issue. We're not taking advantage of the data to process them, and so we have to use tools for analysis to assess how this is working. So not just the product, but also the savings I have, and using the resources that other agencies have. And finally, we have corrective actions. So in that sense, the Reliance process is a process that would guarantee that I'm going to do it in such a way, and the decisions I'm going to make are decisions that will improve my regulatory process. So thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctor Cotto, por su intervención.
Thank you, Dr. Cotto, for your comments and the clarity of your explanation that Reliance could be used for several functions in the life cycle of pharmaceutical products, and to recover the importance of principles that it's not about delegating responsibility directly on other agencies. And for all of our attendees, we'd like to encourage you to ask your questions in the questions and answers chat, the Q&A chat. We're going to ask our panel members that throughout the session, they can answer the questions in writing for them. IFPMA and EFPIMA will share the recordings to these sessions, and we'll also share a document where we intend to give an answer to most of the questions that are asked. So we won't do it live so that we can take advantage and make the best of time for the panel members. So, Dr. Cotto, thank you so much for answering the questions in writing, for your speech or your presentation. Now we'll go to the next point on the agenda, and we're very happy to welcome Mrs. Victoria Palm with her presentation, The Role of the European Medication Agency as a Reference Authority with Tools and Opportunities for Reliable Cooperation. With more than 20 years in the European agency, Victoria leads collaboration programs at WHO and in the region of Africa from her International Affairs Office. She has a degree in pharmacy from the University of Valencia and other studies in Paris, France, including regulatory issues, clinical affairs, and advanced therapy. Victoria, it's a pleasure for you to be here with us, and it's an honor to hear you in Spanish, which is going to facilitate your message and communication. So thank you all, and the audience is yours.
Gracias, Diego, y muchísimas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you, Diego, for the invitation to join you all here today. As you said, been in the European Medications Agency for over 20 years. It's a pleasure to be here with you to share how the European Medication Agency have their own practical application of international cooperation with Reliance, and what's been discussed. We'd like to highlight that many people from many patients, over 2 million people who lack access to essential medications, limits the options for treatment and also increases inequality. So regulatory cooperation benefits us all, patients and health
Así que
systems.
en mi ponencia
So
me
my
gustaría
presentation
compartir con todos
today, I'd like
ustedes
to share with you
nuestro
all
trabajo,
our
cómo
work
colaboramos a nivel
uh,
internacional
and the
dentro de
way
la Unión
we
Europea,
cooperate internationally in
algunos
the European
ejemplos
Union,
prácticos
some practical
que podían
examples
servir de
that could
inspiración para los
be
reguladores de
inspiring
las agencias
for
reguladoras de la
the
región, de América
regulatory
Latina y del
agencies of the
Caribe,
region,
y
Latin
un poco
America,
nuestra
Caribbean,
experiencia desde la Agencia
and
Europea
our
del
experience from
Medicamento.
the European Medications Agency.
Hace 30 años,
So 30 years ago,
los Estados
the
miembros de la Unión Europea tenían
member states
marcos
of the
regulatorios
EU have had
muy diferentes, con
very
ciencias
different regulatory
diferentes, sistemas de
frameworks
salud diferentes,
with different health issues
factores
and
socioeconómicos y culturales muy diferentes.
very
Y con el
different
aumento
social
de
economic factors
solicitudes de medicamentos cada vez más
and
innovadores y más difíciles de evaluar, quedó claro
with
que ningún país
medications
de
that
la
are
Unión
harder
Europea
to
por sí solo
assess.
podía cubrir las
So
necesidades con los
they could only
recursos
cover the
únicos
needs
de cada
and the
agencia.
use
Así que
of
se
each
puso un
agency.
poco
So
como trabajo científico en
this is
equipo
the
y el
work that's
reparto
been
de
done as a
tareas
team
y las evaluaciones
and
conjuntas, un poco fue
the
lo que definió
assessments
la
that
única solución que
defined the
veíamos
only
frente a
solution.
nosotros. Y así se estableció la Agencia del
So
Medicamento justo hace 30 años, en
this was done
1995.
in 20, or sorry, in
La Red Europea de
1995, 30 years
Agencias,
ago. So
la
the
EMEA, no es
European
solo una
Medicines
agencia. En realidad
Agency
nosotros
is
somos
not just an agency.
27 países de la Unión
We are
Europea
27
más 3
countries
países
in
del
the
Espacio
EU plus
Económico
3
Europeo.
countries in
Hay
the
más de
European
4.000
Commonwealth,
expertos que
and
intentan
there's
trabajar
over
juntos apoyando a 7 comités
4,000 experts.
científicos. Tenemos 24 lenguas oficiales
We have 24 official
y aún así nos
languages.
hemos puesto de acuerdo para que un solo procedimiento permita
So
que
we've all
pacientes de
agreed
todos los
for a single
países tengan
procedure
acceso a todos estos medicamentos
for all the
innovadores, que
patients
los
to have
problemas de
access to these
seguridad
innovative
sean abordados
processes.
siempre de forma más
So
coordinada, que la información de los
this is more
productos sea
coordinated,
bilingual
and the
y que se
products
actualice a la vez en todos los
are
idiomas
updated in
y sobre
every
todo
language and
que
in
se
every land,
compartan los
every country,
recursos
and
para
especially
que
sharing the
podamos
resources
trabajar
so
mejor.
that we can work
Así que para
together
nosotros la
and better.
colaboración
So for us,
internacional
international
está en el
cooperation
ADN de
is in the
la Red
DNA
Europea de Agencias
of
de
our
Medicamento.
European network of
Hemos
medications
conseguido
agencies.
trabajar de una forma
So
eficaz y
we have
eficiente
worked
para
efficiently
regular medicamentos
to regulate
y
these
sobre todo
medications,
está
and
basado en
so
la confianza reguladora, en la distribución del trabajo y el reconocimiento mutuo del
we
trabajo de
have
unos
mutually
países
acknowledged the
a
work of a
otros.
few countries
Y la
from
verdad
one
es
country to
que
another. So
nosotros lo tenemos fáciles porque tenemos
it's easy
una
for us because
legislación
we
común, que
have
es lo que
a
nos
common
permite
legislation which allows us
que
to
todo sea más fácil.
uh,
Tenemos unas normas comunes
everything
y
to be
tenemos
easier. We have
unos
common regulations. We
requisitos
have
únicos
single
comunes para
requirements,
todos los
unique requirements for
expedientes.
all of the files,
En-
and
Hay muchos
there's many
mecanismos que
medications
facilitan
or
también
mechanisms
nuestra
that
confianza
facilitate
con
our
socios
trust
internacionales. Como nosotros
with international
estamos
partners,
acostumbrados a
and
trabajar de
we
forma
are used to
internacional
working
entre Europa,
internationally
nos resulta muy fácil
between Europe,
trabajar también con nuestros socios
Europeans. It's easy
internacionales.
for us
Y
to work
tenemos
with
dos tipos de
international partners, and we
mecanismos,
have
a nivel
other types of
bilateral o a nivel
mechanisms. We have
multilateral.
at the
Me gustaría
bilateral and
resaltar que a
multilateral
nivel
level.
bilateral
So
trabajamos
we
mucho con muchos
work
países.
with many
Por ejemplo, aquí en
countries.
el edificio
For
de la EMEA
example,
tenemos
here
dos colegas de
in
la
this space, we
FDA
have the
y de la
colleagues
agencia
from
japonesa
FAA,
que
the
trabajan con
Japanese
nosotros, que
agency that
están
works
en
with
mi
us,
oficina.
who are in my
Una de mis
office now.
compañeras
And one of
está
my colleagues
también
is
trabajando en Estados Unidos en
also
la
working
FDA.
in the United States in the
Tenemos
FDA.
reconocimiento, tenemos grupos de trabajo que
We have working
realmente
groups that
discuten todos los productos
really discuss all
casi
of the
a nivel
products
diario. Hay más
almost at
de
a
30
daily
lo que
level.
nosotros llamamos
There
clusters, que
are
son grupos de
over
trabajo técnico,
30
donde los
of what we
expertos se
call
reúnen
technical
y en
working
diferentes
groups
grupos de trabajo analizan
that
las
analyze
evaluaciones que tenemos
and
pendientes, las
look at the
guidelines
assessments we
y
have
nuestra forma de
pending,
trabajar.
the
Y también a
guidelines
nivel
or manner of working
multilateral con otros países fuera de
in
la
a
Agencia
multilateral
Europea,
fashion with other
fuera de la
countries
Unión
beyond the
Europea,
European agency
trabajamos de
or
una
the
forma
European
muy
Union. We work
conjunta para
in a joint
intentar
fashion
armonizar
to try
los
to
pensamientos que
harmonize
tenemos todos para evaluar
the thinking
medicamentos.
we all have in assessing medication.
Hace unos meses, en
A
mayo
few
de
months ago, in
2024,
May
la EMEA
of
y todas las
2024,
agencias nacionales de la Unión
all the
Europea
national
fueron
agencies
designados
at the European Union,
autoridades
together with the
destacadas
EMA,
de la OMS, WLA,
together with or established the designated authorities lists by the OMS and AA to do reliance in our work to promote regulatory convergence, the harmonization of all of our approaches, and international cooperation. For many years now, we had served as a benchmark authority for manufacturers throughout the world, but with this assessment, our commitment has been reaffirmed in supporting international collaboration and reliance with other agencies beyond the European Union. I'd like to, for the next few minutes, spend some time in understanding the assessment reports that we create that facilitate the process of reliance, because many agencies that receive our reports do not always realize everything or the work that goes behind making these reports. The European agency approves medication via a request and assessment, which then leads to an authorization. The centralized process was established somewhat to expedite the medication approval process in the entire European Union with a single request. Another strong point of this model is that medication can be authorized at the same time in every country in the European Union, which in the end helps in providing access to medication in an easier way, no matter what country you live in. The timeline for the centralized process is as follows. Surely many of you might have a similar system. Companies send us a dossier, which contains the initial list of questions. There's a response. There's a second list after that, or questions after that, and then a final report. The countries and the companies ask us, what do we share when the request comes in to work with the reports? And actually, the final assessment report for the CHMP is the document that contains all of the final assessments and our thinking, because during the initial phases of the assessment, we look at all kinds of questions that may arise, all of the errors, all the information that is lacking, and only the final report contains the decision around the benefits and the risks of our products. At that point, the European Commission establishes the legal framework behind our reports. Our reports tend to be quite long, but in the end, it has a very logical structure. So first, there's a full summary of all the data we received from the companies, summarizing quality initially, then safety, and then effectiveness. After each summary, there's a discussion, which is our assessments of the data, and then we have a discussion on the benefits and risks. In this final report, we also discuss somewhat of what's been discussed in our committees, the various points of view where things might have varied amongst the members of the committee, how some discussions ended up in the product information for the report, and really all the information received from the companies and how this is all reflected in the discussions around the risks and benefits. Over the years, our first reports concluded with what we see here on the slide, saying that the committee has agreed that the request has the clinical data and enough quality so as to back the safety and effectiveness. And since 1995 to 2016, which is when we began to implement this new system for the risk on the risk-benefit assessment, there's been a tremendous change since then. Before, we only spoke in terms of quality, safety, and effectiveness. and in a very concise and clear manner, although often criticized because it did not explain much. 25 years later, we've been working a lot on how we assess the effects, and the risk benefit assessment is one of the most important sections now. And our advisor would say it's the most difficult part. When they issue a report, that's truly the most difficult part, and it follows a methodology. And there's actually been a significant change as how we assess the risk benefit of medication. What you see in our reports is that we first address the benefits and risks in a more factual manner, and then we break down the issues step by step to provide a more systematic approach and a more critical approach, and also for greater transparency as far as how we make our decisions. So we begin by detailing the medical conditions, the existing treatments, the limitations, in a more general sense, and then we dive into the details on the beneficial effects, the uncertainty around the facts, and then we try and summarize and maybe assign a numerical value to all of these data points. And that is how we have a certain criteria in place to strike a balance and decide if the risk benefit is actually positive. In the end, we also have the points of view of the patients regarding these decisions. So we try to be as clear as possible to describe how and why we made the decision. All of this is published not only by our assessments, but I've also attached a document here that explains what EMA publishes and when, because transparency is actually integrated in European Union legislation. So we explain the information around the human medication in its various life cycle stages, from the very early development stages all the way through to the assessments, the variations, the safety reviews, and whether or not a product is recalled. And what we do here is to try and explain what kinds of medications are being assessed. And this transparency is what enables many regulatory authorities to trust in EMA's assessments. I'd like to continue now with some examples, just so that you see the practical application of our international collaboration and reliance. I'd like to begin with our open framework, which is an international collaboration framework that we have with the countries with whom we have a confidentiality agreement in place to do an almost simultaneous assessment amongst all these agencies. So we began this pilot program with COVID, and since it was such a great success, we decided to expand this into other therapeutic areas in antimicrobial resistance, in priority medications under our PRIME system, looking at other products that are treated as uncovered medical necessities, such as Alzheimer's treatments, and also looks at medication that may be in response to sanitary or health emergencies. Our international collaboration, for example, can be seen in the EU Medicines for All. This is a joint assessment framework where EMA collaborates with the OMS or the WHO and the destination countries, because these are products that would be used beyond the European Union. So we help in that assessment, and we combine the regulatory experience of the European Union with the knowledge found in local agencies where they know about the disease and the epidemiology as far as where it will be used. This is also a framework that allows us to not only collaborate, but also helps in reliance, because the participating agencies and others can base their actions on our assessments as far as the use of the medication in their respective countries. EMA also collaborates with the CRP, or the Collaborative Registry procedure. These figures are not maybe updated, but very few procedures have an impact that can truly have a global effect. This procedure then accelerates the national approvals based on a regulatory framework or the regulatory work that has already been done by agencies such as EMA and other regulatory agencies. And this facilitates, again, early access to medication for patients worldwide. At the inspections level, we also have many agreements in place. EMA has signed international agreements with these countries to recognize inspections at several levels, and this really speaks well about the quality of the inspectors. We have all the inspectors needed to inspect whatever needs to be inspected, but this is how we establish mutual trust in our work. And that way we gain benefits for regulators and also for the industry, because we improve the inspection resources, our inspectors, and we have an approach where we can focus our work on the higher risk manufacturers. And this also helps us to foster harmonization internationally. And it helps the industry because there are fewer double inspections. We have an import reanalysis exemption, and we also foster greater international harmonization. At the quality control level, in the European Union, we have also been widely acknowledged and widely accepted as far as our testing results and certificates from our partners, which reduces double work when it comes to analysis and expedites decision-making. As far as freeing up official batches, our certificates are valid in every member state, and that way we avoid having to do double testing. Through the EDQM, we also coordinate and ensure that any testing is consistent and of high quality, following very strict protocols that are common to all, to share experiences. Centralized data and transparency facilitates the sharing of centralized information and also facilitates oversight and decision-making by regulatory bodies in a quick manner. We also have mutual recognition that helps us to exchange data and allows us to detect and withdraw substandard or falsified products from the market very quickly. We see products every year. We take samples from the market in any of the 27 countries, and one of the laboratories looks at quality control, and then these results are recognized by all of the member states of the European Union. Our pharmaceutical product certificates are another example, or another tool that can be used to ensure trust in medication commercialization and authorizations issued under the best practices of the BPF. EMA is maybe one of the largest issuers of ECPPs for pharmaceutical products. We issue over 11,000 certificates every year. The latest trends in Reliance, from our standpoint, are around fostering or promoting Reliance at the level of the variations, because there are many countries that use Reliance, but that have not really introduced it into their regulations. So after authorizations, we also have to promote these efforts after authorizations, because the regulatory resources and the pharmaceutical company resources under EMA assess a very small number of the products that are actually assessed in the European Union. We assess over 8,000 variation requests or renewals, post-authorizations. And pharmaceutical companies say that 70% of the industry's work is based on these changes. So when the changes are complex and require a lot of time, when there's uncertainty in the approval timelines, there's always an increase in the risk of running out of supplies. So we're supporting a pilot program that we began last year to submit approved variations by the EMA to multiple national authorities beyond the European Union all at the same time. This pilot consists of having the applicants submit their variations to the participating bodies, and then with the final assessment by the European Union, they can then carry out their efforts in a quicker manner. We recommend that they align their specific requirements under the EMA to then assess the differences between them all to truly assess the variations. Currently, there are 10 pilot programs underway, and we have 5 more that are being prepared. Most of them have focused on quality variations, but we also have some at the clinical level as far as variations that are also underway. We have 5 to 100 regulatory authorities involved, and although few have been completed, they are all saying that they have truly seen an acceleration in the approval process that is quite significant. What we'd like to do then is to analyze the level of engagement per country, the degree of reliance, if the timelines have truly been shortened in assessments, the harmonization level, and also some of the resources that have been saved, if we have truly been able to save resources via these pilot programs or not. And as we heard earlier, you have to plan the way to begin. The easiest way for us to proceed has always been to first have common legislation. Sometimes changing legislation is not easy, and many things can change also through guidelines. So establishing, as well as establishing with whom we have to have trust, mutual trust. You can have trust with one country and then move along in the discussions after that. But what you have to be clear on is in what procedures will I use Reliance and in which I will not. And for this, you have to publish, and we've seen this from our Egyptian colleagues. They are a role model for us because they have very clear guidelines. And we need this for the initial assessments and for the subsequent variations and the inspections. Also for freeing up the batches. I mean, we have to have very clear pathways and publish them so that everyone is informed about what to do and how to do it. What is somewhat difficult, and something that every country is doing differently, but we should all agree on ultimately, is on deciding what data is needed to implement regulatory trust. We must also implement a cultural change at the agencies, at the assessors, because assessing through Reliance is not the same thing as doing independent assessments. And sometimes it's not easy to have a cultural change internally. I recently heard the head of an international agency in Europe who was saying that for the youth, that's not an issue. And they can change their mindsets immediately. And to them, Reliance is simply part of the culture. They live in the European Union, they always have, and they see this joint work with other European agencies as part of their culture. But those who are older have some difficulties with that. So they need the tools to facilitate the collaborative work and establish clear procedures. As we heard previously, we have to try and measure the impact to see if all the efforts we're making are actually worthwhile. To close, I'd like to share with you some final thoughts because we are all facing many challenges and we all have an increase in our workloads and limited resources. As we heard, international collaboration and reliance are a need, not an option. It provides benefits to all, to regulators, to the industry, and to patients. And above all, I would highlight that reliance does not mean it's not about externalizing decisions, but instead it's about incorporating additional experiences in our work. And dialogue with all of these interest groups and all of ourselves helps us to prioritize and decide what to do and how to do it. Because in the end, no agencies, no matter how many resources it may have, can do everything on their own. So with that, I'd like to close and thank you very much for your attention.
Victoria, como latinoamericano,
Victoria, as a Latin American, as a Spanish speaker, and as a professional in the health industry, I'd like to extend my personal gratitude to you for your engagement, for your clarity. And just like you said at first, the European Medicines Agency is a benchmark agency for many countries in Latin America, for many of us. So we are sure that this presentation has really answered many questions, and there are many questions that we have in the chat. And of course, this shows the interest of our participants. Unfortunately, we cannot answer them all live, but like we said before, we will be sharing the answers to your questions in writing as soon as possible. And I'm sure you'll be on the panel in a moment, and we can continue to speak about the subject. So thank you so much for that, and we will see you on the panel.
Now I'm going to switch to English, and we are going to give the floor to Dr. Rin Mahmood, Head of Biological Products Variation Unit, and Dr. Jasmine Mohammed, Manager of the Evaluation Unit for Registration of Human Pharmaceuticals, both from the Egyptian Drug Authority, and they will share Egypt's experience and the benefits of implementing regulatory reliance. Dr. Rim, Dr. Jasmine, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, Diego. How are you? I'll be starting the session, and then Yasmin will follow, okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, but if you can put please your presentation in the mode presentation.
Yeah, I will do so.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'll be sharing with you today the regulatory reliance in the Egyptian Drug Authority from the start till we start to practicing the reliance in our authority. First, I would like to start by a quick introduction about the Egyptian Drug Authority, so you can all know as well. So EDA has been established in 2022 as the regulatory body of for medicinal product in Egypt. By the law, of course, it has 9 central administration. Each of these administration has its specific role. These basically are the names of our administration. I'm coming from the Biological and Innovative Products and Clinical Trial Central Administration, and my colleague is coming from the Pharmaceutical Products Central Administration. EDA has multiple international accreditations. So as you all know, in March 2022, EDA has reached the maturity level 3 for vaccines. And in December 2024, EDA attained the maturity level 3 for medicines. EDA is also a part of the ICH member. We have more than 11 EDA members are involved in more than working groups in the ICH, currently working now. We have also multiple international collaborations and corporations with other regulatory bodies all over the world. These are examples. Also, EDA is considered as a center of excellence in Africa. So we are basically integrating and involved with many African countries and many committees to foster collaboration with these African countries all over Africa. There are also multiple bilateral cooperation with multiple authorities all around, including mutual recognitions and regulatory reliance, and where there are multiple MOUs involved in this collaboration. And part of the collaboration is involving the industry. We have, in November 2024, we have launched the IFPMA Alliance, where we integrated and collaborated between the manufacturer and the government partner in order to enhance the regulatory system overall, the ADE. So let's start and dig into the regulatory reliance in ADE. So you are all aware of the definition of the reliance in the WHO. I want to highlight that some parts in the definition where the WHO defines the reliance is the act whereby the reference regulatory authority may consider or give significant weight to the evaluation performed by another reference regulatory authority. But this doesn't mean that the regulatory authority needs to abide to this decision. No, the relying authority remains independent and responsible and accountable for their decision. So reliance is not a lesser form of regulatory oversight. This is a very important information for any regulatory authorities to acknowledge in order to change their mindset in applying the reliance. It's not a lesser form of oversight or regulatory oversight. You need also to acknowledge the benefits that reliance brings to patients, industry, and government. It has multiple benefits. I tried to summarize some of these benefits, but these are not all the benefits. So to patients, it will mainly facilitate and accelerate the access of quality assured products. For the industry, it means harmonization of the documentation all over the international and worldwide to the regulatory authority. It also means decrease the cost and increased efficiency. While for us as regulator, it definitely means like relocating the resources and reducing the duplication of work and also strengthening the international collaboration with other regulatory authority and being exposed to reference regulatory authorities' assessment and evaluation. You need also to have some general consideration while applying reliance. The concept of reliance is not restricted only to the initial authorization, but it could be applied throughout the life cycle of the medical product, starting from post-approval changes, inspections, and lot release. But assuring the sameness of the product is really essential in applying the reliance. So basically, the reliance is a mutual, like a two-way process between the manufacturer and the regulatory authority. The regulatory authority, starting with the regulatory authority as well, needs to have the willing and the intention to use the foreign assessment and rely on the assessment of other regulatory authorities. This is like the mind shift of the regulatory authority. But as for the manufacturer needs to confirm the sameness of the product. This is a very important point in applying the reliance from the industry side. And they need to provide the same documentation to the different NRAs and assure the sameness of the product. Of course, there are some differences that may arise, like, for example, the different product stability data due to the different weathers and environment, but the core of the product needs to be the same. So how did we implement the reliance? We applied a phased implementation. I will be discussing the implementation of the reliance in the biologic section, and my colleague will talk about it in the pharmaceutical part, how they implemented this. So in 2015, we started by relying on the GMP inspection. By time, you need to do further reliance. So you need, as I said, it's a phased implementation. You cannot implement reliance at once and decide to implement the reliance all over the process at once. No, you need to go stepwise. Then on 2016, we started to rely in the MAA approval, and we started to do this on the relying on the EMA and the FDA, two of the stringent regulatory authorities. Then we extended this on 2022 into the reliance on the assessment of their assessment report for the EMA and FDA still as well. And one of the major steps was in 2023, where we started to expand the reliance to the post-approval changes. And finally, on 2024, we extended the reliance to the lot release approaches that we practice in EDA. So starting with the marketing authorization, one of the most important thing in applying the reliance is embedding the reliance practice into your regulations. So we started by amending and updating our regulatory system by updating the regulations that we follow, which is for the registration of biologic product. We use the decree for 343 for the chairman. So we started to amend this regulatory guidelines and update their implementation guidance in order to provide guidance to applicants on how to implement the reliance and have like a standard to follow during the evaluation and during the submission from the applicant side. Following this, we started to publish many guidelines to foster and enhance the reliance practice in the EDA. Finally, as I said, for the post-approval changes and for the lot release. As I said, we have multiple pathways for the registration. We embedded the reliance in our regulation. As you can see, let's go to the last row, where the timelines, this is a huge difference you need to see, are the timelines when you use the reliance. You can see in the normal pathway, it was for the evaluation. In order to register a product, you need more than 120 working days, while through the reliance pathway, we have two levels of reliance I will be discussing now. You can take from 30 to 60 days. So basically these levels, depending on the amount of information provided from the applicant side. If they provide the unredacted assessment report and the CTD, the assessment could take up to 30 days. While if they provided only the CTD and they are EMA and FDA approved, it would take 60 days for the evaluation. And for registration, we rely on the EMA and FDA assessment. For the post-approval changes, of course, you know that post-approval changes are any changes to the dossier status that are registered in the regulatory authority, whether this is the quality, safety, or efficacy. We embedded as well the reliance in the guidelines of post-approval changes. We published all the regulatory components of the submission dossier, the process, the steps, the timelines in the guidelines of post-approval changes. And you can find all these guidelines on the ADA website. So what happened? We used to have the normal pathway for different variation categories. Then we, as I said, started to use the reliance and the notification for minor variation. So how do we implement the reliance for post-approval changes? We simply applied a verification route with shortened timeline. So the procedures are more expedited and the timelines are shorter. So we apply this for specific products from the specific regulatory authority? Yes, we use the assessment for reference regulatory authority. We have a list of this authority that contains 24 reference regulatory authority. We can rely on their assessment report if the applicant provided the unredacted assessment report for this specific variation file. This is simply a huge difference. As you can see, for the normal track, major quality changes could take up to 60 working days for evaluation, while during by applying the Reliance track, major quality changes could be evaluated in 15 working days. Of course, depending on the amount of the data and the quality of the data presented from the applicant side. Now we have more than 69 products registered through the Reliance pathway and more than 155 post-approval changes file have been assessed and evaluated through the Reliance pathway. As for the lot release, in the lot release, we applied a risk-based approach where vaccines are simply doing a minimized test, while for biotherapeutics, we rely on the patch analysis and perform a post-marketing surveillance in the market. You can see as well the impact of applying the Reliance in the lot release, where the timelines have been reduced from 46 to 7 days. For the inspection, products imported from reference country, we don't do on-site inspection, while non-reference should go an on-site inspection. So this, of course, will contribute to reducing the timelines of inspection as well, and the overall registration process as well. Of course, there are challenges, as I said, and we will be discussing these challenges in the panel discussion. Of course, we have much more future direction, so I will keep these 2 slides to be discussed in the panel discussion. Now my colleague Yasmin will proceed discussing the Reliance approaches, how they are practiced in the pharmaceutical part. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Reem. Thank you, Reem, for the intro. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And I want to thank my colleague Reem for the intro about the Egyptian Drug Authority. And let's start to talk about the Reliance for the human pharmaceutical products in Egypt. Sorry, I'm Yasmin Hisham, Manager of Evaluation Unit of Registration File for Imported Human Pharmaceutical in EDA. And let's start with, give me a second, please. Okay. Let's start with the quick look about the Reliance history regarding the pharmaceutical products in EDA. We start from more than 10 years. The Reliance approach has been in practice, but without formal documentation. It will be started initially by the exempting GMP inspection for products imported from predefined list of reference countries, as Dr. Reem mentioned. This is a 24 reference countries chosen according to WHO criteria and approved by our technical committee in EDE. And so on. In 2016, there is a ministerial decree 820 from 2016 was released that formally defined the Reliance and enabled the fast-track registration. And so on in 2022, which is following the establishment of EDA, the EDA chairman issued Decree 780 from 2022, along with a specific guideline for Reliance. And from 2024 until now, we are updating the Reliance guideline to include the pathways, eligibility criteria, and the requirements for sure. And regarding the pharmaceutical products and our shared challenge that will be driving us to implement over regulatory Reliance, we have for a long review timeline, delay patient access to innovative and life-saving therapies, and for sure, the fragmented regulatory framework and capabilities and the limited regulatory resources. As with many regulatory agencies, EDA faced constraints in terms of staff expertise and time of review, increasing volumes of submission. So all of these factors will drive us to applying of the regulatory Reliance. And for the strategy of Reliance for the pharmaceutical products, we adopt a unilateral Reliance recognition, follow the WHO guidelines on good Reliance practice, and also we rely on a stringent regulatory resource, which included in a list of reference countries that are chosen according to WHO, as I mentioned before. Regarding the list of reference authorities, it's 24 countries like Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, and so on. And for the applicability regarding pharmaceutical products of the Reliance pathway, it's applied for the imported finished products, which is approved by the reference authority or stringent regulatory authority. And it will be applying also for the different activities in pharmaceutical field, the new registration, life cycle management, analysis activities, and for sure for inspection, pharmacovigilance activity. And according to our guideline for the Reliance in pharmaceutical products, we have two pathways, verification pathway and abridged Reliance pathway. Regarding the definition of verification, it's an administration process, not a scientific assessment to reach a regulatory decision, which is based on the registration or authorization by the stringent regulatory authority or WHO pre-qualification. And regarding the abridged Reliance pathway, it's a limited assessment assessing specific part of the CTD file, relying also on a peer assessment from stringent regulatory authorities or WHO pre-qualification. And for sure about the documents we for the company or applicant to submit according to our regulation for Reliance in pharmaceutical products, it must submit a CTD dossier according to ICH regarding the content and format, and for sure CPP, Certificate of Pharmaceutical Products, and now in EDA we accept the electronic certificate pharmaceutical product for sure, and the manufacturer must comply with the GMP regulations, and the sameness letter, which is a letter come from the marketing authorization holder that will be declared the products to be in the market here in Egypt have a sameness regarding safety, quality, efficacy with the product approved by the stringent regulatory authority. And for sure, the most important document for Reliance, the unredacted assessment report. And after applying the Reliance, we have an achievement regarding the Reliance. So in numbers, we have a new applications. Until now, we have 90 applications were approved using Reliance pathway for the pharmaceutical products, with the review time frame shortened to 50 working days compared to the standard international Reliance time frame of 90 working days. And regarding the post-approval change, we have received around 140 variation requests through the Reliance variation evaluation rule, and out of which 97 were approved and released. These Reliance requests were based on evaluation conducted by regulatory authorities, which will be listed in our reference country, including ANSIM, IFPMA, FDA, MEHRA, Swissmedic, and so on. And for sure, the Reliance have a big impact in regarding the authority and industry for sure. Regarding the authority, it will be improve the assessor building capacity, which will lead to more efficiency and accountability and make us more focused on local production. And for industry, it prevents the repetition in performing studies and analytical studies, which lead to save cost and time for the company, and also to be prevent the post-approval commitment. And for sure, that will be lead finally to the faster access to the medicine, which will also lead to improve in the public health. As Dr. Reem mentioned, some of our achievements for EDA that make EDA considered reliable for regulatory lines. We achieved WHO accreditation and attained maturity level 3 for medicine and vaccines. And also we have a large and diverse industrial landscape. We are now a member of IPRP and ICH, and also regarding we have extensive human competencies that make EDA considered reliable for regulatory norms. And for the frequently asked question, due to high volume of Reliance requests we have received, and based on our analysis of the most asked question, we have compiled a list of frequently asked questions called FAQs, which is published in our EDA website. And publishing these FAQs globally promote a transparency for sure, reduce duplication of effort, and support regulatory harmonization by providing consistent guidance to the stakeholder across the different regions. And finally, the conclusion relies for sure on the work of trusted regulatory research can enhance the regulatory efficiency and support timely access to safe and effective medicine for patients. We believe of that. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you both very much for sharing your experience with us. As Victoria mentioned, it is truly valuable to see how you have managed to implement regulatory reliance. For Latin America, it is essential to learn from other agencies and exchange experiences. So thank you very much for that. Both of you will join us again for the panel discussion, so please stay connected. We will come back to you shortly. I'm going to switch to Spanish now. Muchas gracias a todos los asistentes que se han mantenido
Thank you
en esta
all to
sesión.
the attendees who've stayed in the session, and we're going to have a moment to go to our panel where we will have the people from Egypt and Brazil, and we want to remind you that you can ask your questions and answers, and many of the questions that you've already asked have an answer. So we would like to encourage you to focus on this. Our next presentation is called Template, to show that we are talking about the same product in before several regulatory authorities. And this presentation is by the International Federation of Manufacturers of Pharmaceutical Products, IFPMA, our global association. We always appreciate for their cooperation, and the presentation will be by my colleague Ana Padua. Ana Padua has over 25 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry. She has led different regulatory policies in Europe and in America. So Ana studied chemistry and pharmaceuticals at the University of Sao Paulo. She has also studied in the Public University of Brazil. So Ana, thank you so much for joining us, and with all the FBMA group, and so the audience is yours. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see it now?
No. Voy a... Ahora sí.
Ahora sí, tal vez solamente.
Sí, creo que sí, ¿no?
Ahora sí, perfecto.
Está perfecto. Muchas gracias, Diego, por la
Thank you,
invitación.
Diego, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to participate in these dialogue forums, and we can perform and play a role in this beautiful vision of finding solutions that speed up access of patients to innovative medications and of quality. So in that regard, as Diego mentioned, I'm going to present a tool to support the identity of these products before the regulatory authorities. It is known in English as IFPMA Product Sameness Template. So here's a brief introduction. The industry is completely committed to the effective implementation of Reliance, and of all the mechanisms that speed up the availability of the product and innovation to the products, to the patients rather, we're saying that in reality, it's not a new concept. For many years, the regulatory files have used CPP, which is the approval by the reference agency. And I like the example in Argentina, Decree 750 of 1992, which uses the CPP approval or the reference agency from 1992 for the approval of synthetic products as the main document for decision making, which is still valid. And I agree with the previous speakers, as was mentioned by Victoria, that it's not just a vision, it's a need of how we lived the COVID situation. There is no agency that can do everything. There's not enough resources, and so cooperation is important. And We are talking about the European model, which is completely based on cooperation between the member states. So we're not talking about the why, but the how in that sense. And IFPMA, well, I'm going to introduce the tool of IFPMA, and so that we can see it as a tool to assist in the implementation of Reliance. Here, I'd like to comment about a survey by EMA with the members of the industries and associations in Europe to better understand the Reliance mechanism and how it's being implemented in the past 2 years. And the survey was conducted in 2023 and published, just published in this article, Reliance in Action, which we have a link to for you to access. And what I'd like to mention is about the assessment of similarity or sameness of the product, which was identified in 75% of the countries where the document was requested at least once. So that means that it's already common to submit that assessment for the identity of the product, which is approved by the reference authorities, and the product that will be used in the Reliance process. And in that same publication, Reliance in Action, it mentions that one of the documents requested for the files as a product sameness, which is the evolution of equality in the products or the identity. There's several terms in Spanish, and this is the document that could be alternative or to be a complement to the Reliance processes. Now, I'd like to share with you the definition of the WHO on the sameness of the products. Well, according to the WHO, product sameness means two products have identical basic features. So the product that is presented or submitted to the authorities that regulate the decisions of others, the product has to be essentially the same. And then that guideline has some examples as to how to proceed. And it's important here to say that the regulatory authorities need to validate that it's about the same product to provide reliance. And here there is a joint understanding by the authorities of the industry which talk about the same product. And that does not mean that it has documents or files that are identical. So that is a very important point because there are several factors that are important to comment that the documentation also has to consider the local regulations, and we can have other examples here as well to illustrate this part. And finally, the WHO also mentions that the impact and potential identified differences have to be assessed by the manufacturer and by the national authorities that Reliance applies at the time of determining the feasibility of the decisions made. So it is important here to mention that there may be differences, but the most important thing is that the differences found do not impact the application of Reliance in that sense. So we're going to be talking about the template proposed by IFPMA with the intention of perhaps unifying or finding a simple way for everyone to have the same template to ease the understanding between the agencies, the industry, and in a very simple and transparent form. So in the next slide, you're going to see how it is more clear. So there's an example here in this template proposed by IFPMA for the description of the differences between product approved by the reference authority and the product that will be assessed by Reliance. So here there's an example of the quality in module 3, and so column A is to identify the specific CTDs, and column B is to establish if the document is present in the application or not, and if there is a difference between the information being submitted to the authority and the application to Reliance, then and the one that was submitted to the reference authorities, the justification, which is column D, brief justification that the difference has no impact on the quality of the product, including references to backup data whenever pertinent. So there is a very simple template here that includes all of the essential information to transparently report the differences between the products. And here there is an example on a difference that's present in the section of the manufacturer, which is the place of release of the final or finished product, which in Europe is you require the release of a product in one of the member states. And here I'm going to, well, there's an example here, a practical example here. This is a case study on the product offered by Roche Laboratories, which shows that the entire chain is the same except for the release, the place of release of the finished product. They're all released in Switzerland with the which releases them in one of the member states of Europe. And of course, these references or reference authorities include these countries in the assessment with EMA, and they will have to justify that difference here. So it's very important to show that the differences will not impact the implementation of Reliance. And here, in that example, the company is, well, or it says that in every release site, you apply the same criteria and procedure for release to guarantee that the products have an identical quality. So that means that all of the release sites follow the same quality systems and therefore do not impact the use of Reliance in this case. Now, this is another example of how our colleague from Egypt mentioned. Well, it's very common when the reference authority has different climate conditions than the authority that's going to apply to Reliance, then of course the stability of the medication will be different, will vary, and there will be some adjustments to address the local conditions of the country that is applying to Reliance. And here is my last slide, which are the main points that IFPMA considers, which is the base of Reliance, and transparency that all the parts of all the parties is key to the best regulatory practices and foundations for reliance. And here we're considering three major pillars for the success of reliance. First is to highlight the differences. It's very important that the industry to highlight all the differences. So that's the proposal of using this template that contemplates that all of the differences with the technical support are necessary. Another important point is to maintain that space for dialogue, which is very important to build a mutual understanding. So to understand the quality system and to understand the impact of the differences in regard to the application of Reliance, and also the case studies, which are very valuable for the country. And finally, we're always going to support the regulatory convergence to be facilitators of the implementation of Reliance.
Also for positioning the IFPMA with the template. To close, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues from the IFPMA, especially Diego Salas from IFPMA, who really helped us and invited us to be here today. Isabel, Jorge, and Sergio from IFPMA, Suzanne Osborne from Roche also, thank you so much. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. And I'll give the floor back to Diego to continue with the event agenda. Thank you. Thank you so much, and a special thanks to our colleagues also from IFPMA for their very essential tools and very valid tools to support regulatory reliance. Very clear messages you've sent in the sense that regulatory authorities have to make sure that that reliance is applied equally to all products. And it's also essential to understand that when speaking of one product, we are not necessarily speaking of the files or identical files or documentation, hence the importance of regulatory convergence. As regulatory requirements are more harmonized, reliance becomes easier. Let's move on now to the panel. I'd like to let you know that this panel will be led in English, and the name is the Crossroads in Innovation and Trust, How Reliance is Molding the Future of Regulation. To enable interpretation, since this will be in English, the participants can choose your language using the globe icon on the bottoms of your Zoom screens. I'm very pleased to invite our esteemed colleagues, Leonardo Sembrum, co-chair of the Working Group on Regulatory Affairs and Pharmacy Oversight, and leader for regulatory policy in Latin America for the company MSD, and also Camila Gomez, the coordinator of the LATAM network for EFPIA and policy lead for regulatory matters for Roche. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Diego, for this introduction. Can you go to the next slide? We will have roughly 25 minutes for our panel discussion, and I'd like to introduce our panelists. So you have heard already from Dr. Victoria Palmi from the International Affairs Office of the EMA. We're also going to receive Dr. Rim Mahmoud from the Egyptian Drug Authority, and Dr. Yasmin Ishan also. And my pleasure is to welcome as well Dr. Ana Carolina Moreira from the International Affairs Office of Anvisa. Welcome so much. Welcome to all our panelists. Please, we have a lot of questions already in the Q&A box. We would like to ensure you that even if we're not able to take some of those questions today, we will address them and publish them with the answers so that nobody is left unanswered after this event. So I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Leo to kick off with the panel.
Thank you very much, Camille. It's a pleasure to be here and co-moderate this important discussion alongside with you. We know that Reliance is no longer just a concept. It's increasingly becoming an strategical operational tool to strengthen the regulatory system. So our goal in this panel is to explore practical experiences, key lessons learned, the kinds of institutional or operational changes that are helping Reliance move from vision to action, as Dr. Cotto said at the beginning of the presentation. So with that, let's begin with our question for the distinguished panel. So I would like to start with this question for Egypt, EDA, in terms of institutionalizing Reliance. So Reliance has been included as part of the Egyptian agency overarching regulatory strategy, embedded in the way the agency operates and plans the sustainability of its activities. Can you provide your insights and your suggestions to other regulatory authorities which may be at the beginning of this journey? What concrete steps has been taken to institutionalize Reliance, making sure it's sustainable and it's a sustainable policy for the Egyptian agency? What operational barriers do you consider most urgent to address to make a Reliance and a strategy that is successful? Please, Dr. Rin, Dr. Jasmine.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
This is actually a big question to answer. It's like three questions in one question. So I will divide it, as I said, into three questions. So what are the insights that I would give for other regulatory authority? I would start by the regulatory authority should start by clarifying a clear vision and define Reliance. What is Reliance meant for the regulatory authority? Is it just relying on the assessment? Is it are you going to perform a bridge or verification? You need to properly define Reliance for you as a regulatory authority and develop a clear vision. Also, as well, as I said, Reliance doesn't mean you're dependent on the regulatory authority. So you are accountable for the decision. So you need to implement the proper mechanism to ensure and that the properness of your assessment and the selection of the regulatory authority you are going to rely on. Also, what I would suggest that you need to work on three areas. The first one and the most challenging is the mindset of the regulator and of the industry. You need to change the mindset of your regulator and let them understand that this is not a lesser assessment and this is not a lesser evaluation of the documentation, and they do not need to do all and every assessment by themselves. You can rely on the assessment of other regulatory authority if you trust their assessment and you properly select these regulatory authority. Then you need to update your legal framework, update your regulation, develop the proper mechanisms and guidelines for the implementation of Reliance. And finally, try to map your framework and recognize the areas where you are going to integrate and embed the Reliance practice in. And you don't need to do the Reliance, as I said in my presentation, all at once. And Reliance is not all or none. You can try to implement Reliance, a phased implementation, and you can try to implement it on specific product category, on specific regulatory functions, in order to acquire the proper experience and knowledge to be able to extend the Reliance practices to other regulatory functions. Part of the important in implementing also the Reliance is capacity building. You need to provide the proper training for your expertise and provide them with the proper knowledge in order to know how to extract the proper information from the documentations presented and how to assess these documentations. Also, if you want me to talk more about what the concrete step that we have implemented, as I said, these basically are the steps. We started by recognizing and mind mapping our ecosystem, starting on working on the mindset of our regulator. We try to engage as much as we can the industry into our system by after drafting the proper guidelines. We publish this for public consultation. We make sure to collect the feedbacks from the industry on the proposed mechanisms and guidance for the implementation of Reliance. And then, as I said, we started to implement the Reliance into phased implementation. We didn't start all at once. I show you in my presentation the timelines and the plan that we achieved in implementing the Reliance. And simply, you can try to integrate the Reliance into your system step by step. Finally, empowering your regulators and let them understand the importance of this regulatory reliance on them, and what are the benefits they are going to achieve by applying the Reliance. And as Martin Harvey said, Reliance is not an outsource, it is an insource. So you need to work on insourcing your capabilities, not just outsourcing the information or outsourcing what you need for to properly assess the documents presented. What was the third part of the questions? There was a third one.
How you are making sure it's a sustainable policy for the agency?
I think, yeah, and as well as the operational barriers, there was part regarding the operational barriers, yes. So for the barriers, I left this part in my presentation to discuss it here in the panel discussion. First is the legal framework. The current regulations that doesn't have any information or any like procedures or on how to implement the Reliance. So you need to work on your legal framework. The transparency and the availability of unredacted assessment report, which is a huge challenge. So in order to rely on a specific regulatory authority, you need to see their assessment and you need to see their work. You need to go through how they went through the assessment. So the availability of unredacted assessment report is one of the major important barriers that need to be addressed. And here comes the role of the industry. Their commitment to provide this unredacted assessment report is very crucial in order to assure the reliability of this document and the availability of this document as well. As I said, still the cultural resistance and the mindset still one of the barriers. Providing proper communication with the industry and with the regulators is a key for eliminating this barrier. Of course, these barriers were defined throughout the process and will be handled one by one throughout the process. So it doesn't all come at once. By practice, you can see the barriers really well and work on enhancing these barriers. And one of the very important barriers is the product sameness, as Dr. Anna were just explaining, a really good presentation. Is you need to define the criteria of the sameness and allow some differences that are acceptable, that won't affect the product quality, efficacy, or safety. So by defining these areas, you can simply overcome this barrier and start to rely on other regulatory authorities.
Right. So thank you, Dr. Rin. I don't see Cami in the panel, but I can
Yeah,
continue.
it says here
Oh,
that
yeah.
I cannot start my video because it has been disabled, but I'm still here.
Okay,
So
excellent.
I would like please to, okay, so start my video. I promise you that I'm here. So thank you so much for this very comprehensive answer. I think it's almost like a recipe to reach good reliance practices, good reliance in practices, right? Yes. So my next question goes to the EMA. The EMA has been historically a reference here for industry and to regulators, not only in Latin America, but also around the globe and for different regulatory activities. And recently we have been seeing a surge in the adoption of reliance practices. And this role, this protagonist role as a reference authority of the EMA is becoming even more evident. So this increased reliance on the EMA, I imagine, has brought some extra demands to your agency, and which also you must have like limited capacity to support other authorities, and I'm pretty sure that you receive many requests for collaboration. So in this scenario, how do you see the future of the EMA by sustainably contributing to this global advancement of reliance, and how is your relationship with other regulators, and especially those regulators with whom you do not have an assessment, a confidentiality arrangement?
Thanks for the question, Camila. As we were hearing throughout the presentations, it's really important sometimes start small, keep increasing, but also pause and look and analyze what is it that you are doing, how is it that you are doing it, and how can you streamline all your processes. What we do, for example, to support Reliance is not working in isolation. We work very close with our colleagues from industry, and actually we will not be able to share ourselves all the documents directly with all the regulatory agencies. We will be a bottleneck for all these processes. So what we do is actually use industry and facilitate, make sure that everyone understands that the assessment reports that we have provided the industry on their assessment of their products, they are the ones that need to be shared. So we look often to streamline how are we facilitating these processes of reliance with trust and transparency, ensure that obviously what is forwarded is the products that we have assessed, but always taking stock at what we are doing. In these pilots that we have started, and we want to do some sort of evaluation at the end of the year, the first pilot that we did, we kind of overdo it in a sense that we did a webinar, we did one or two webinars, we were spamming everyone, we were drawing letters. Now we're scaling down kind of our involvement because people know what we are doing. We have published information on our website. Things are more streamlined. So it's important that as you are doing things, you take stock of what you are doing and you try not to be the bottleneck in the whole process, because at the end what you are trying to do is facilitate a faster assessment. So we always try to see where we can facilitate or where we are a bottleneck and try to work together with our partners to find solutions to how we can work better with others.
Gracias, Victoria. Absolutely. So we strongly believe, and we are in line with you, that this balance between the global leadership, the operational capacity is key, and it's also encouraging to see or hear how the European agency is thinking in a long term about this responsibility. Thank you so much for your input. So now let's move on with the next question. We would like to hear perspective from ANVISA, EDA, about performance evaluation. No, it's a long question, so I will go in a slow piece. So in the context of the global regulatory good regulatory practices, monitoring the implementation of regulation is crucial as it enables assessing its impact on regulated entities, identifying areas of opportunities, promoting accountability, and allowing for data-driven adjustment to regulatory framework. How are EDA and ANVISA planning to evaluate if the current reliance pathways are delivering the expected results for all the stakeholders, including the industry as an end user of the process? Also, if you can give some examples of measurable objectives and monitoring mechanisms about your indicators. Maybe we can start with Ana Carolina from ANVISA. Ana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leonardo, for the question, and thank you to EFPIA, IFPMA, and IFPMA for the invitation to participate. First, I would like to go and give you some context, because in 2021, ANVISA formally established the regulatory impact assessment process, and since then we have been working with a 4-year regulatory impact assessment agenda This agenda is important because it brings predictability and transparency to which regulations will undergo a full regulatory impact assessment. And being very honest with you, it's not feasible to do for every regulation this depth analysis. So for now, our Reliance regulation is not included in this official agenda, but we quickly realized that we do need some dedicated monitoring for Reliance. Reliance is a relative new tool for Anvisa. Our first regulation is from 2022. It was RDC 741, which laid down the general principles and the conditions for Reliance. And after that, in 2024, we published 4 normative instructions that are the instructions that give the specific tailored guidance about the type of product and the type of regulatory activity that we will do Reliance with. Since, like I said, it was published in 2024, and we still have limited information about the implementation of Reliance, but we realized that the monitoring is very essential. Today, we have some limited human capacity in the technical areas, and we did not want to burden them with this monitoring. So we took this strategic decision to put the monitoring of the Reliance pathway inside the International Affairs Office. And I'm not sure if you're already aware, but last week we published a new page in the Anvisa website dedicated to Reliance. And the next step now is to develop a digital monitoring tool. It's going to be a dashboard with real-time data about our Reliance implementation. And we are also planning to put it in this website that we have just published last week to promote transparency and engagement. And what we plan to put in the dashboard. The first thing is we're going to track how many applications are coming through Reliance versus the traditional pathway. And then we're going to see the ones that went through Reliance, which ones were successfully processed using Reliance and which ones were not, and why it was not applied. Even before we started this centralized system, we have some preliminary monitoring, and the results for this limited data showed us some of the challenges for implementing Reliance, and I think I can share some of them with you. One of them you already touched upon in this webinar. It's about the sameness of the product, and we have found that sometimes we have differences in the product's characteristics that make it difficult to use Reliance. We had differences, for example, in indications and target populations, so we were not able to use Reliance in some cases. And the other challenge was also touched upon in the webinar is relating to revising internal review procedures and training the technical teams. The evaluators, they're used to doing one type of review, and Reliance, it really demands this extra training and changing some internal procedures so the technical teams, they can really apply the new pathway. So we are improving our internal procedures and learning with the implementation how to train the technical teams. And I would say as a last challenge, we still have some regulatory convergence that we need to improve, especially when we talk about post-marketing authorization and changes. We also heard today from the European colleague that Reliance should be used in variations and post-approval changes. But what we've seen is that we still don't have in the globe a converged approach to changes, and that sometimes makes it difficult to apply Reliance. I'm gonna give you just a little bit more flavor regarding also inspections. We also had some challenges in the monitoring we have been doing regarding inspections reports formats, and sometimes also divergence in the classification of the nonconformities. So sometimes we were not able to apply Reliance in these cases. But despite all of these challenges, we still remain fully committed to implementing and strengthening Reliance because it really ensures timely access to products to the Brazilian population. We believe that we are in a learning journey, and since the legislation is quite new, and we believe that it's still something we should pursue because it will give us efficiency. Thank you.
Excellent. Now let's move on with the perspective of EDA.
Okay, so in addition to what's have Anna said,
Yeah.
so you need to regularly monitor. Yeah, we can focus on two sides or two axes, as you can see, monitoring the internal performance, evaluation and analyzing the numbers, as she was saying, and monitoring the impact of the implementation of Reliance on the availability of the product. This could be achieved through regularly calculating the number of approved applications or submitted applications through the Reliance pathway versus the normal pathway that we use to have. The average time of the approved application through the Reliance versus the normal pathway. Actually, since we implemented the Reliance, we have facing an increased number of proportion of the Reliance applications versus the normal. The industry have seen the impact of the Reliance on the process and how smooth it is and how it is beneficial for them as for us. So this have led to increasing the Reliance application. So and another axis is monitoring the industry feedback. This could be achieved through regular feedbacks and workshops and webinars, collecting the surveys from applicants, and always have a communication channel with them in order to properly collect the feedback and monitoring how the application of the process and their impact on them. So engaging the industry to this monitoring system is very important. A third element is the monitoring the quality of the assessment itself of the regulators in order to ensure if they need more training, they need more communication with other regulatory authority, more exposure, and this could be performed by regularly auditing their performance and their report in order to maintain and the consistency of applying Reliance throughout different process. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reem. We are approaching the end of our event. We will have some closing remarks by IFPMA, but before we move to this closing remarks, we have a final question for Dr. Palmi from the EMA. It has to do with the assessment reports, with the public assessment reports. How does the EMA balance providing sufficient detailed public assessment reports to ensure the transparency and trust while also protecting commercial confidentiality? And are there any plans? There was a lot of questions in our Q&A box about the assessment reports, public versus non-public assessment reports. And are there any plans from the EMA side to improve accessibility or the level of information included on those reports? And can you briefly touch on what's the difference between a public and a non-public assessment report, and which one should be considered in a Reliance exercise from the EMA's recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, our assessment reports are very long already, so I would recommend focusing on the final assessment report. Sometimes we hear agencies, they would like to have also the 120, the 180, but actually the final assessment report is really comprehensive enough to contain sufficient information to take a decision on the assessment and how we have come up to those decisions. On the question of public versus unredacted, our assessment reports are not that different. In general, we only redact part of the quality assessment. We never redact the clinical, we never redact the benefit risk assessment. We redact personal information because we are not allowed by EU legislation to publish this personal, like the names of the assessors, although everyone knows, or the rapporteurs. But in general, the redaction is quite limited. What is What is not there is obviously part of the quality information that is also important for an agency to understand and to know the sameness of the product that we were discussing. We have maybe a description, qualitative description. However, we are not really having maybe that quantitative information just to protect the information of the manufacturer. I think when an applicant is sharing a dossier, this information will be there. So if there's no need to use the redacted data because the information will be in the dossier. I guess having a reference to the public assessment report is simply a way to say, look, this is the report, I haven't touched it, this is on the EMA website. It facilitates trust that somehow is in the hands of the regulators and there has not been any discussion. But unredacted assessment reports are needed by also many regulators to issue their own discussions, whether they are public, using the public data with their own submission or the unredacted assessment reports, it doesn't really matter. The difference is not that big.
Thank you, Doctora Victoria. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. We are approaching the end of the panel, but of course, that transparency without compromising sensitive data is a delicate balance. It's great to hear EMA is continuing to evolve in this space. So a big thanks to all our panelists today. Your insight has helped highlight not only the progress made on Reliance, but also what is still needed to ensure it becomes a sustainable and impactful regulatory practices. And of course, thank you everyone in the audience for your active participation. I would give now the floor to Diego to close the last part of the session with Sarah. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Leo, Cami, y por supuesto un agradecimiento especial a los reguladores que nos han acompañado.
Thank you, Leo, Cami, and all the regulators that have accompanied us throughout the sessions and the European agency. So we've come to the end of the webinar, not without sharing some final comments about how Reliance is a pillar for the regulatory agency. So I have the honor of introducing and inviting Sarah Allen, Director Attaché for IFPMA, who has aligned this work in IFPMA and advanced therapy, so in Africa and other regions, and working now with international organizations on strengthening these regulatory systems to improve access to medications throughout.
And for all the support that we always receive from IFPMA. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you all for joining us today and for the rich and insightful discussions we had throughout the webinar. And on behalf of IFPMA, I would like to express my appreciation to our sister associations, EFPIA and IFPMA, and also to all our esteemed speakers, panelists, and participants for their strong contribution today. The discussions have underscored the critical role that regulatory reliance plays throughout the entire product life cycle, decreasing timelines for evaluations on not only marketing authorization, but also post-approval changes, lot release, and inspections. And it contributes to regulatory system strengthening, and ultimately, it will improve patient access to safe, effective, and quality-assured medicines. So this is actually, for us, very exciting to hear all the examples that we had today from ED Egypt and also from Anvisa Brazil on the implementation of regulatory reliance and also the important role to play that was also demonstrated by the European Medicine Agency, highlighting the importance of trust and transparency for the evaluation of medicinal products using the central loss procedure. And these experiences provide valuable lessons and learnings for all countries at different stage of implementing reliance frameworks at national level. At IFPMA, we believe that regulatory reliance is not just a technical tool, it's also a strategic enabler of resilient health system. It allows regulatory authorities to make the most of limited resources focus on core national priorities, and benefit from scientific assessment of trusted counterpart. And we've heard that regulatory reliance is a shared responsibility. No single agency can do everything on its own, and cooperation is very important. And the pharmaceutical industry has a vital role to play in supporting reliance through transparency, timely data sharing, and active collaboration with regulatory authorities. And we are very proud to support initiatives such as this one to promote reliance and regulatory convergence. And as highlighted by my colleague Anna Padua, we advocate for the consistent adoption of concepts such as product sameness, which can serve as a technical foundation for reliance across agencies. Also,
I think we're having problems with her connection.
Contributing to the development of harmonized standards that support convergence and trust. And looking ahead, we see great potentials in expanding reliance practices in Latin America and globally. This is requiring continuing collaboration amongst national regulatory authorities, regional bodies, international organizations, and also the industry. So everybody has a crucial role to play. Together we can go far, building more efficient science-based regulatory systems that serve patients better and faster. So thank you once again, muchas gracias for the insightful discussion, your engagement and commitment, and we really look forward to continuing this important journey with all of you.
Thank you very much, Sara. I'm going to switch to Spanish. El fortalecimiento de los sistemas regulatorios
The
es una
strengthening of
tarea
regulatory systems is a task and responsibility of everyone. As Victoria mentioned, in this WHO, there's over 2 billion people that do not have access to essential medications. In Latin America, access is still a challenge, although there are numerous challenges for this problem. The WHO has one of the main missions, which is to reach out to all the people who do not have access. And if there's no public recipe formula, there are two tools that are very useful: the adoption of best practices, and of course, the incorporation of mechanisms in Reliance for one or several conditions. On behalf of IFPHARMA, IFPMA, and EMA, we appreciate all of your contributions and your commitment and generosity in our efforts for the moderators and panelists. So please follow us on our different digital platforms, and you will find multiple additional resources and also information on our upcoming events, as a mission for all of us to continue working as a team and for the growth of our regulatory systems and public health. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next time.